If you have a misfire and you can't find it, and you have reworked your carburation and reworked it and done everything you need, and you've done all the things you need to do tune-up wise.
Welcome back.
All right, got something to show you peoples. It's going to be a distributor video again, another one. This is kind of one of the last things, I think. Jacob, have you ever heard of distributor phasing?
A little bit.
Okay, so phasing is when two things have to work together at the same time or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go check something out real quick. All right, so distributor phasing has to do with this rotor, the pickup underneath the rotor. There's your pickup, or points if you're running points. When the points open, or this reluctor goes past this pickup coil, you want that to happen when this is pointing directly at one of these posts right here. Okay? If it does not line up with that post and is somewhere, let's say, like here in the middle. Yeah, let's just go ahead and flip it over. If it's point, you see, it should be pointing here, here, here. If it's just off a little bit, that means its phasing is off. And this can cause a very rare problem. It doesn't happen very often, but we're gonna let the folks know, for the reason that if you have a misfire and you can't find it, and you have reworked your carburation and reworked it and done everything you need, and you've done all the things you need to do tune-up wise, like what would you want to do tune-up wise in your ignition system?
Well, I'd probably check my timing.
Good one.
I would check for carbon buildup in the cap.
Okay. If you mean if you had a miss, you would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I'm saying, what would you change? So you already said check your timing.
Mm-hmm.
What would you change out? What would you put new parts in?
Probably new spark plug wires, boots.
Yep.
And spark plugs.
Yep. Yep, for sure, plugs, right? Okay, so I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but I set mine. I set my spark plug gaps at about 65 thousandths. If you don't have a good coil, it won't work unless you're working low RPMs, and you got to have a pretty good ignition system for that too, period. So if you set it at 65, it makes it very hard for the spark to happen in the plug, okay? And if this phasing is off just a teeny bit, and we'll just come up here because I made a little drawing earlier. Here's your rotor. It's kind of ugly and crude, but it should be pointing right here, right? But what if it's over here? Well, if it is over here, the spark doesn't just jump from here to here. It has to jump from here to here. It has to go a longer distance. And it's getting it closer to the next one in line. And when it gets it closer to the next one in line, if your compression is very high and your engine is on the money, maybe even slightly to the lean side, it makes it harder for that spark to jump the gap. Okay, more compression and lean conditions make it harder, and the spark wants to go the easiest path. Typically, the easiest path is the shortest, so you would think, boom, no problem. But what if this rotor was phased over here? Well, it's not that much further to go to jump over there, but you're bringing it closer to this one, and if this is easier, that spark would rather go there. And if it goes over here, then you have a miss when it's supposed to be over here. Okay, that happens usually with a big RPM and those situations. So how do we check for it? How do we know that's what it is? Any ideas? You got any? I know you said already, change plugs and wires and all that stuff in it, but that didn't fix it, okay? And we've already messed with the carburetor, and that didn't fix it either. So one thing that we can do is put our gap back down to a regular gap, like 35, and that'll make it easier for the spark to go. And if the miss goes away, well, gosh darn it, we still want 65. It always makes more power. And but if it cleans up the miss, well, um, then we know we got a phasing issue possibly. Okay, could be a bad coil breaking down, could be other things, but we're going to say that probably got a phasing issue. This is also why bigger diameter distributor caps are more desired. If you look at like a Ford type distributor cap, like a GM and a Chrysler would be, old school, would be about that big around. So if you look at the distance between your reluctors there, you have this much distance, let's say. But if you have a big distributor like a Ford cap like this, well, from here to here is much bigger distance. That bigger distance puts more gap and forces that spark to keep going to the reluctor that you want inside the cap. So now the question is, how do we make sure that's what it is? Now it's a pretty rare thing. I've seen it one time on one of my vehicles and one time on somebody else's ever, where this was not pointed in a good place. So how can we find out if ours has that rare problem? And this problem may be getting worse over time because we've had a lot of problems with mass-produced parts and pieces that we buy aftermarket that aren't exactly that preciseness that we're looking for. So
Yeah, like maybe a factory error or something like that could cause.
It's happened through the years from every manufacturer, but it seems to me that lately, with the cheapo parts that we get these days, which aren't cheap anymore, but they're cheap nonetheless, that these tolerances are getting worse. And so this problem probably exists more now than it did in the past. All right, so let's discuss how we can discover this is what our problem is. Okay, so when this rotor is pointing and our pickup down here goes by, it's got to jump that big gap and wants the easiest path possible. What you can do to determine if this is your problem is something you don't want to race with, but do it anyway. Make about a 10,000 spark plug gap. I mean, just make just enough room for a spark to jump across. And that misfire, that high-end misfire, might go away. 20 thousandths if you're afraid to go that far. Most people are between 35, 45. I run mine at 55, sometimes 65. It depends on how strong my coil is. And my coil needs to jump a bigger gap under compression. That's huge. And the coil then has to resaturate. That affects your high RPM. So you experiment with yours. Another thing that you can look at here is flat out the position of where that rotor is pointing when it fires. And there's a way to do that, and you knock a big hole in here, and you're going to paint the back side of your rotor. And then on the opposite side, so if you see we put it on here, on the opposite side we put our timing light here. That timing light will flash through that open hole, and you'll see where your rotor is pointing when it fires. Disconnect your vacuum advance, because vacuum advance will adjust the phasing. But remember, vacuum advance only works at part throttle with high vacuum, and when you have high vacuum, you have low compression. So we got a rotor here. It's white, which is what I like to use, the white one. It makes it easier to see. Take a black Sharpie and paint a black mark on there so it's easy to see. Okay. Then when you put your hole in your distributor cap, make sure it's in a location where you're going to be able to easily look at it. So in this case we put it here. So let's put this on there. timing light out. Make sure it's on 0 here. Make sure your vacuum advance is disconnected. The vacuum advance changes the phasing of the distributor. Now, I'm going to see the best we can do here. I hate this timing stuff on camera because it is hard to see. Can you see my mark? If that vacuum advance is on there, it moves way off. Make sure you got that vacuum advance disconnected. You can see the phasing is perfect on this. So we did the test, and the phasing was good. But what if it was off? What is it that we need to do? Can we fix it? Let's check it out. This distributor has been sitting around for a long time. You can tell how dirty it is. This was used on a race car a long time ago that I had, and I just saved it. I've used it since then, but I saved it as a good bad example. Now the phasing can be affected by this tab right here. This is where your snap goes on. And that tab, if this was not, you can see it's right here in the center. If it was off to one side, it would make this cap sit kind of crooked, and that would change the phasing of these reluctors in relationship to the rotor. Well, in this case here, you can see how it's broke here. I took that, chipped it out, and was able to change. The cap was fine, but I was able to rotate it like this to get my phasing more correct in the distributor. It was a temporary fix. We were at the racetrack. On an electronic distributor, a lot of times these tabs have been cut off. These connectors are one-way connector. But if the engine will run if you hook these on backwards. If they're backwards, it changes the phasing of your distributors. Just make sure that when you go to check your phasing, if it's really far off, that you check these leads all the way back to your electronic ignition module to make sure that they haven't somehow been reversed. And if they've been reversed, it will change the phasing. So that's a place to check. All right, now here is a way that you can fix your phasing issue if you're pretty savvy about welding and things like that. This arm right here on your vacuum advance, well, when it gets tugged this way, it advances the timing and it changes the phasing when it does it. Well, that phasing doesn't affect it because you're at part throttle, and the spark has no problem going through a low compression situation like that. So what you can do is you can cut this arm, shorten it, reattach it by welding it, and reinstalling it, and that will change your phasing permanently. Or if you need to go the other way, you would cut it, add material to it, and make it longer. Don't get too excited about it though, because this still has to move to advance your timing. And if you pull this stator plate too far, well, then it will make it so that this ignition timing gets out of whack between your pickup and your reluctor. So don't go too far with it, but you can change phasing by changing the length of this arm right here. So now that we've determined that the vacuum advance can affect the phasing of the distributor, that brings up a question: can the mechanical or centrifugal advance affect the distributor? And the answer is absolutely not. I've had people ask the question, well, maybe I can change the phasing by welding it on the outside, or maybe I can change the phasing by welding it on the inside. If you weld it down here, will it change the phasing? And the answer is no. The mechanical advance absolutely does not affect the phasing one single bit. And let me show you why. It's because this stator plate is holding the pickup coil, and in this case it's an old points distributor. So it's picking up from this location of the distributor, which is going to be directly related to location of the cap. That never changes. When the mechanical advance advances, it's simply moving this ahead on this shaft. And when it moves it ahead on the shaft, it's moving both the points cam in this case and the reluctor here and the rotor here the exact same amount. So the position of this and this never changes. Only the position of this and this related to the shaft changes. It's no different than you adjusting your timing inside on your engine. It does exactly the same thing. So the answer again is no. The mechanical advance does not change the phasing of your distributor. So things that can cause this problem, in addition to this being in the wrong location, all this has been machined and put together. You hope it's precise. If it was built on Monday, the hangover might affect who's building these together, right? So one of the things, you see this down here, there's an arrow. That arrow is pointing this way. This distributor rotates this way. You can see here, back up a little bit. Yeah, you see that rotor? If you look where that vacuum line goes in, if you follow it, it goes around like this. So this is big block. Big block is rotating counterclockwise. Small block is rotating this way. So if this was in a small block distributor, there's a little pin down in here. And you can see that pin is not in there. See that? But look, when I rotate it around here, the pin is in there. So that's the opposite rotation location. Okay? Now, if this was in the wrong location, you would have that arrow with the pin in it, showing it was meant to go the wrong direction. That will change your phasing of your distributor. Don't want that. Easy fix. Lift this off. Move your roll pin to the other side, put it back in. Just make sure that the roll pin is in the direction of rotation you need. That happens quite a bit. People will take these distributors apart. They don't realize that that's different, and then they put it in the wrong location. So that's one of them. Your ignition module can change phasing a little bit. And, you know, if it's a piece of garbage, it could. And I've seen it on more General Motors than I have seen on Chrysler. These Chrysler modules get a bad rap. I don't have the problems people are having, so guess what? I don't get it. But I have seen them off, you know, very smidgen amounts that didn't affect our phasing, but I have seen them change things. So that's a place you can check. Okay, a way that you can fix it is you can put washers underneath this vacuum advance canister, and it'll hold it a little bit away from the distributor, and that will move our pickup coil just a slight direction, but it's only one way. So depending on whether your phasing is off this way or this way, you may be able to help it out by putting a washer underneath the canister where it mounts. One way that we fixed it, we had a really good Hemi, original factory Hemi distributor, wanted to keep it in there, but it had bad phasing. And one of the ways you can fix it is, you see it's got this little tang in here that clocks this rotor with this slot right here. And if you're good, you find what direction you need your rotor to go to phase it correctly, and you grind material out of here until the rotor goes to the phasing you want. And then you build it back up on the other side, weld it, clean it, and make it so, boom, it fits in there and fits solid. You do not want this walking. You don't want this misphasing thing going on, and especially if you're using it under a heavy load, wide open throttle, at a higher RPM. That's usually where it comes up. So that's a little bit of Tall John Fun Shop advice, how to fix it. Well, a little bit of that, but how to find it, hopefully you can go out and find it. It's rare. It may not be your problem, but it's an easy way to find it just by doing a tune-up. Okay, find the one that is the easiest for your timing light to look at, blow a hole in it, check it, put your new cap and rotor in place. What do you think?
Love it. Fun. Bye-bye.
Hey Jacob,
Yeah?
what do you do if you like a video?